Welcome back to Love and Hard Money. I'm Brian. A quick PSA before we start. I doubt I'm reaching anyone who's not already aware, but if you have a Coldcard hardware wallet as part of your Bitcoin security, you need to immediately move funds to another wallet. There was a bug in the code that has left user funds vulnerable. This is an emergency and it requires action from you now. If you don't know where to go for help, reach out to me at brian@satoshigeneral.com. I'll try to connect you with the right people. I'm probably not qualified to help, but at least I know where to send you. Over $100 million of user funds have been stolen so far. This is not something that can be put off. This isn't an episode I wanted to do, but it's one I feel like I have to do. I'd rather focus on our fight for love than our battle with evil, but life is colored by contrast. Last week, we witnessed a devastating flaw in a tool many of us trusted to secure our life savings in a war against state money. It was a wake-up call for me. What we're doing in Bitcoin is not some cute project. This is a revolution, and we need to be honest about what we're trying to accomplish and the forces that want to prevent us from achieving those aims. I don't know if the Coldcard vulnerability was just sloppy coding, a state-level attack on our movement, or something in between. But I've concluded that it's best to treat it as if it was intentional, because that resets my frame for every other part of my security setup. It's time to tighten up. A little inside baseball on how I write these episodes. The first pass is always my thoughts and ideas. I feed that into Claude to generate a first draft. I tweak it, feed it through another LLM to fact check, and then try to edit it back into my own voice. It's not quite as authentic as a freestyle riff, but it lets me put out weekly episodes while still running a business, raising my family, volunteering in my community, and occasionally trying to have some fun. What's been fun to watch is that Claude and ChatGPT sometimes try to nudge some of my more radical ideas back onto the reservation. This week, I'm going to talk about the nature of evil, and I know I'm over the target, because Claude did everything it could to convince me not to cover these subjects. So this one's all me, in my own voice. Nice to meet you. Last week, Fauci sat before Congress and pled the Fifth 111 times. I'm calling this week's episode On Evil. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I am trying to define a pattern in the events that have defined our world for the last 25 years. I've spent my adult life watching and sometimes participating in the pattern. Crisis, reaction, unity, confusion, disunity, protest, silence. The crisis fades into the past, but the reaction, usually legislation, stays in place, and we march forward toward less freedom and less sovereignty, toward more human suffering. The first thing I've seen that breaks with this pattern is Bitcoin, and as Jeff Booth says, these two systems cannot coexist. One is going to break the other, and the most powerful, evil incumbents in the world are not going to let us win without a fight. So back to Fauci. He was already pardoned. A pardon means you can't be prosecuted, so if there's nothing to hide, the Fifth Amendment doesn't protect you from anything, because there's no crime left to be charged with. The only reason to plead the Fifth after a pardon is if you're worried about a different exposure, perjury, for lying today, or something the pardon doesn't cover. He's now been voted in contempt of Congress, but I doubt anything comes of it. I should back up and tell you where I've landed on COVID. Maybe you agree with me, or maybe you don't, but pay attention to the pattern. I think this thing came out of a lab. Ralph Barrick at UNC Chapel Hill built a gain-of-function playbook used on coronaviruses, and his lab had a real, documented, collaborative relationship with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Obama administration put a moratorium on this kind of research domestically in 2014. I think that moratorium is exactly why work like this flowed to the lab in Wuhan. Moving it offshore let them circumvent the moratorium, and Fauci himself arranged the funding. When the guy who ran the agency funding this work goes to the fifth 111 times rather than answer a direct question about origins. To me, that's a real tell. The connection most people fail to make that pushes this into the realm of possibly intentional and almost definitely sinister is that in September 2019, months before anyone had heard the word COVID, the overnight repo market seized up. The Federal Reserve had to inject emergency liquidity for the first time since 2008. Something was breaking in the plumbing of the financial system. Some people connect those dots and say the lockdowns were the cover story to let the government print an ungodly amount of money, 40% of all dollars in circulation, without the public connecting it to inflation. Because we're saving lives beats we're saving the balance sheet. People were still chapped about the bankers being bailed out while they lost their homes. Had COVID proved to be more deadly than it ultimately was, it would have also killed a lot more of the unwell, which itself would improve our national balance sheet by reducing future spending from Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Dark, I know, but we can't rule it out, especially when you look beyond COVID and watch the pattern emerge. Next, I want to talk about Epstein. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because it's the shape of the thing that matters, and frankly, the subject grosses me out. Epstein wasn't running a hedge fund. He was running an international influence operation at the highest levels of politics, academia, and business. The actual product was leverage. He made himself the connective tissue between power and money, and everyone who touched that web became compromised or useful to somebody. It's the mechanism I want you to notice, because it's the same mechanism in every story we're going to talk about today. Get close enough to power, and you get close enough to the money. To understand the story, you don't even have to know who he was working for or to what end. You just have to see the pattern. Lies spun up to move a select group of people closer to the top of the pyramid. Evil used as a tool of compromise. Let's take another example. I was a teenager when 9/11 happened. For some reason, I was home from school and sleeping in. My dad came into my room and said, "Wake up, looks like you'll be going to war." Everyone knew immediately where the path was going to lead. Event, reaction, unity, and then later, confusion, disunity, silence. What happened to World Trade Center Building 7? Building 7 was a 47-story skyscraper. No plane hit it, although one did crash in a field in Pennsylvania earlier that day when the passengers fought back. At about 5:20 that evening, Building 7 came down, straight down, symmetrically, into its own footprint in a matter of seconds. NIST's own report admits that for roughly 2¼ seconds of that fall, the building was in free fall, meaning for that stretch of time, there was nothing underneath it slowing it down. That's not a controlled demolition claim I'm making for you. That's their own number. Their official explanation is that fire weakened a single column and the rest cascaded. Only 3 buildings in all of history have ever collapsed at free fall speed into their own footprint without a controlled demolition. All 3 happened that day. You can choose what to believe, but to me, the whole story of that day unravels when you pull that single thread. And it's only one of many parts of the story that fall apart under examination. What came out of that day for this country? The Patriot Act. Surveillance powers that didn't sunset the way they told us they would. After 2 decades of military campaigns across the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the ripple effects into Syria, Yemen, Pakistan, Libya, Somalia, Brown University's Cost of War project puts the total death toll from those wars, direct and indirect, at somewhere between 4.5 and 4.7 million people. 38 million displaced. That's the largest forced displacement since World War II. Trillions of dollars funneled through defense contractors for decades on the back of one morning that was probably a lie. Once you start looking, you can't stop seeing evil. A few more examples. MKUltra. The CIA ran mind control experiments on American citizens without their consent for over a decade. It's not a theory, it's declassified. Tuskegee Airmen. The U.S. government watched black men die of syphilis for 40 years, on purpose, without treating them, to study the disease's progression. Declassified now, admitted, apologized for. Decades too late. This one's more recent. RFK Jr., now in government himself, has said publicly that he believes Lyme disease, COVID, and RSV all trace back to gain-of-function research. Whether or not you're a fan of his, that's the sitting Secretary of Health and Human Services saying it out loud. His uncle, President Kennedy, assassinated in broad daylight, and 60-plus years later, the government is still fighting the release of the complete files. This one's probably the most important because it's the base of the pyramid. The founding of the Federal Reserve. A shadowy cabal of men, mostly bankers and politicians, cornered the market in the price of time and risk, effectively capturing money creation, half of every transaction, and silently siphoning away your life energy for over a century. This is the original sin and the one that makes all the others we've talked about profitable. We could go on. Every one of these has the same shape. A small number of people operating with cover made decisions that cost ordinary people their health, their freedom, or their lives. And in every case, it brought that small group proximity. Proximity to power. Proximity to control. Proximity to the thing that actually runs this whole show. Money. The cost of that access is evil. Of these, Fauci, Epstein, 9/11, MKUltra, Tuskegee, the Kennedys, was in its own way an influence operation. And what they were all really fighting over was the same prize, not power in the abstract, access to the money printer. Because whoever sits closest to that damn machine gets to decide who gets funded and who doesn't, who goes to war and who doesn't, whose research gets greenlit and whose gets buried, whose crimes get prosecuted and whose get pardoned in advance. That's the ring of power. Whoever wears it is corrupted by it, because the temptation isn't, should I do evil? It's, I can fix this one thing I care about if I can just get a little closer to the fountain, so I'll compromise a little. And then the evil hand reaches out to welcome you and pull you into their scheme. If you take the hand, you are one of them forever. Bitcoin, at its core, is an attempt to take the ring out of anyone's hand. 21 million. No committee, no emergency powers, no preemptive pardons for the people who run the ledger, because there is no one person running the ledger. That's the entire point. It's not a trade, it's not a new technology, it's not a hedge. It is an attempt to end the era where getting closer to the printer is the highest leverage move a person can make. I'll be honest with you. I don't know for certain whether last week's Coldcard incident was an operation. I don't have to know for certain to tell you what I do know. The people who have held the ring for hundreds of years are not going to hand it over because we asked nicely, or because the math is elegant, or even because we're right. Every story I told you today is evidence of exactly how far they are willing to go to protect access to that machine. millions of deaths, tens of millions of lives ruined, money siphoned away from every person in the world. You think they're going to let Bitcoin stop them? So, we harden our custody, our operational security, our own discipline, our souls, because sloppy Bitcoiners are easy to attack. We stop assuming good faith from institutions that have shown us, again and again, exactly what they're capable of when the money is on the line. Most importantly, we face the evil and we say, no more. We call it what it is, in public, in the light of day. Like the founders of the United States, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. These things given to the cause of separating money from state. Or, the other option, you join them. Take the hand when it reaches out to you. Get closer to the fountain yourself. Take your cut. Look away from the rest. I think we're better than that. I think that's the whole bet. Thanks for listening. This has been Love and Hard Money.